welcome our guest, the President of the Treasury Board, the Honourable John Baird. We're happy that you could make it with us on such short notice. I'm going to ask the indulgence of the committee to move any discussion on motions until after the minister's presentation. If you're in favour, we'll do that. And as you know, we allow you to make a short presentation and then we open it for questions. So, Mr. Baird, if you want to introduce the people with you, and the floor is yours.
I'd like to begin by thanking you, Madam Chair. It's always a great pleasure for me to come before your committee to speak about my functions as President. Treasury Board. With me today, I have David Maloney and Wayne Waters, our other officials. And we're in your hands to answer any and all questions you may have on government operations.
Opportunity to discuss the tighter approach to expenditure management and responsible spending adopted by the government since we took office, and the savings measures that we announced on September the 25th. In my opening statement, I'd like to provide a high-level overview of three issues. First, why we're taking these measures. Second, how they're being implemented. And finally, third, what this means for the future. After that, I'll be happy, and my colleagues will be happy to answer your questions on specific details of our expenditure management initiatives. Let me begin first with the principles, the reasons for these measures. Nearly a year ago, Canadians elected a new government on the promise of greater openness and greater accountability. Nowhere is this promise more important than on the issue of how government spends. Canadians have told us that they expect their hard-earned tax dollars to be invested responsibly in effective programs that meet their priorities. They're concerned about waste in government programs. Unfortunately, the expenditure management system we inherited is not up to meeting the challenge of those concerns and of those expectations. Over the past decade or so, an incremental approach to funding decisions has become entrenched as a way of doing business. Many would be surprised to hear that the government is spending about $5,000 a year more for each Canadian family of four in programs and services than it did just 5 years ago in 2001. Over the past 5 years, total program spending has grown on average by 8.2% annually. In 04-05, growth in spending reached 14.4%. It's clear that a new approach is required, and we've already taken steps in the right direction. The Federal Accountability Act, our first piece of legislation, will establish important new checks and balances and enable Parliament and Canadians to see more clearly where tax dollars go and how they are applied against measurable results. The vital next step is to renew the government's expenditure management system to position us to spend better on behalf of the people of Canada to ensure that we get maximum value. This will involve making important improvements in four key areas: enhancing the quality of information departments provide to support Cabinet and government decisions, reviewing existing programs on an ongoing basis so that ministers have the performance information they need to make sound decisions. 3, ensuring departments focus their management effort very explicitly on the need to achieve and demonstrate value for money. And finally, 4, better reporting to Parliament and Canadians on where we spend taxpayers' money, what we achieve with it, and whether they're getting good value for money so that the government can be held to account. Madam Chair, this brings me to my second issue, how we delivered on the first step to do more responsible spending. That is delivering our Budget 2006 commitment to secure $1 billion in savings. As I announced in September the 25th, 2006, achievings of the $1 billion in savings will be accomplished through tighter and more disciplined management of spending, which actually started on the first day we took office, and the results of the review programs that we conducted and announced in September. Let me tell you how we conducted the review. Building on the directions and the criteria set out in the budget, we adopted a rigorous approach and took responsible decisions to ensure that federal spending achieves results, provides good value for money, and most importantly, meets the priorities of Canadians. I worked with my officials to review spending plans from past budgets and consulted ministers to identify programs and spending in departments that do not meet the criteria we had set out in the budget. In July and August, a committee of ministers established by the Prime Minister met 3 times to review savings proposals in detail and to ensure they met the budget criteria. The savings proposals were then considered and agreed to by Cabinet. We have made some tough but responsible choices on behalf of Canadians. The list of savings totals $1 billion, reflects the savings that we identified in programs that had unused funding because of lower take-up or because their objectives were being achieved through other programs, those that did not provide good value for money, those that could be delivered more effectively by streamlining or consolidating, and were not meeting the priorities of Canadians. Let me give you a few examples of cuts made within my own Treasury Board portfolio. The previous government had decided to spend an additional $20 million to support regional ministers. We believe that the existing funding of $3.8 million is sufficient for that purpose and decided not to proceed with additional spending, saving $20 million for Canadians. By eliminating uncommitted funding for government-wide initiatives, we will achieve savings of $18.5 million. This is funding that is no longer required from past government-wide initiatives. A reduction in program funding for the Public Service Human Resource Management Agency of Canada should generate more than $83 million in savings, and this includes eliminating funds set aside for the previous government that were more than is required to proceed with necessary classification work. And savings of over $9 million will be achieved by reducing low-priority training for federal employees at the Canada School of Public Service. The school has a budget this year of $89 million to deliver its programs. We will save $9 million over 2 years while ensuring the school's resources are focused on core federal learning priorities. I could provide many more examples of the significant economies, but in the interest of time, I'll move on. Madam Chair, I'd like to conclude my opening remarks by focusing on the future and how the government will continue to ensure it is generating the best possible value for taxpayers' dollars. Responsible spending is the cornerstone of accountable government. Furthermore, responsible spending is not a one-time exercise. It's the way that this government intends to manage tax dollars year in and year out. These reforms signal a fundamental change in the management culture in the federal government, a change that is essential for ensuring ongoing fiscal discipline and measurable results on the issues that matter most to Canadians. All Canadians have a direct stake in the success of the exercise. Canadians are solidly in favour of a plan for managing spending and the need for the government to make decisions based on clear criteria and on measurable results. Our expenditure management system will lay the groundwork for disciplined and well-informed decision-making and transparent reporting. The government intends to be open and straightforward with Canadians regarding the public finances. Making this vision of accountable, transparent government a reality will require a better way of managing overall spending throughout the Government of Canada with a much stronger focus on results. Going forward, the government will make responsible spending the norm by requiring that all new and existing programs go through a systematic and rigorous examination. This will ensure that this government only approves funds that are actually needed to achieve measurable results in a way that is effective and that provides value for money. Our new expenditure management system will be built on the principles of fiscal discipline, managing the results, and maximizing value for money. This government's new direction in spending management is a clear departure from the wasteful ways of the past. Madam Chair, through these initiatives, Canada's new government will ensure significantly greater transparency, accountability, and value for money in all federal spending. We will settle for nothing less. That's why this undertaking is at the centre of this government's management agenda. Thank you very much, and merci, Madame la Présidente.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you. We'll begin with the Liberals for 8 minutes.
Mr. Baines.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming today. I listened to your opening remarks, and you clearly indicated in your opening remarks a set of savings, and you gave examples, which I appreciate. But somehow there were some examples that were missed, and I just wanted to highlight those that you have not brought to the attention of the committee when you were talking in your opening remarks. To the $5 million cut from the status of women, $10 million the elimination of the Youth International Internship Program, $11 million for the elimination of the First Nations and Inuit Tobacco Control Strategy, $18 million for the Literacy Skills Program, which I will come to later on, $55 million for the Youth Employment Initiatives, and $6 million for the Core Challenges programs, to just name a few of the cuts that you didn't indicate. And you indicated that the decision to make these cuts were based on the premise that you wanted to eliminate waste and that you wanted good value for money. In your opinion, you believe cuts for women, for Aboriginal people, for the youth, and specifically here for minorities and for literacy skill programs, they're considered a waste and not a good value for money?
Let me respond to the first two examples you listed. A long list of them, and we only have 8 minutes for this round, so I'll take the first two that you mentioned. The cuts, for example, at the status of women are on the administration side, not on the grants and contribution side. I think if you look at the ratio of administration to the grants and contributions line, it would probably be among the highest in the public sector. So we want to focus on results. So rather than making the easy decision of cutting the grant budget, which we want to do, ensure that we have more streamlined administration. There's very few departments of that size, if any department that size, which has the type of regional operations that it does for such a small budget. I'm not sure if all the cuts have been reinstated that were made by the member for LaSalle-Lamard in 1995. I'm not sure if it's been brought up to the level that he inherited. But with respect to Aboriginal people, yes, we eliminated the Aboriginal, effort to combat smoking. Smoking cessation efforts were not successful in that regard, and that's what we were spending public dollars on. And we measure our commitment not on how much money we spend, but on the results that we get. And the Minister of Health will be coming forward with a program that will hopefully actually lead to smoking cessations for the market that they're targeting.
I appreciate the feedback on that. I guess the question I had now specifically was for the literacy costs skills program and the 17.7 million or 18 million that was cut for that. And since we tend to quote from the newspapers, I'll take a quote here that you had indicated to the press just a little while ago that with respect to the cuts to the literacy needs, that we've got to fix the ground level problem and kids who don't learn to read properly in school, and not by trying to do repair work after the fact is what the quote here indicates. And then, I just want to question you with respect to that. Do you still believe that the literacy cuts should have been made, and specifically with respect to adults, that they don't need these funds?
I think it is a gross distortion to read that into any comments I've made. I was forced earlier this month, 2 weeks ago, after the member for Wascana had quoted me falsely. I challenged him to table the quotes on tape, as he's committed he had. In fact, when he did table them, they didn't quote me as he said they would. I got up on a point of privilege, and the member for Wascana has refused to retract his comments with the tape that he provided. In fact, did not have me saying what he had repeatedly told the House.
But did you say what I just quoted right now?
I don't know about the exact quote that that you read from the newspaper. I would encourage the member opposite not to believe everything he reads in the newspaper.
I'm just following your lead from QP yesterday.
I would say that I take my own experience as someone from our province, Ontario. In Ontario, federally and provincially, we'll spend about $20 billion, more than $20 billion, on education, on training, and on learning. We provide supports to preschool programs. We provide supports at the primary and secondary level. We provide supports at the post-secondary level, at colleges and at universities. We provide funds for immigrant settlement. We provide funds for adult education through, for example, in my community, in 4 school boards. We provide substantial funds through EI, through social assistance. We provide substantial funds through the labor training agreement. All of those things have infrastructures in place, and I think we've got to ensure that each one of those, whether it be for children, whether it be for youth, or whether it be for adults, that they achieve success in teaching people how to read. And rather than develop a federal program and something that is clearly provincial jurisdiction to sort of try to clean up the failures of those systems, I think all Canadians, be they children, youth, or adults, that there's a good system in place. We've increased support in many of these areas, particularly immigrant settlement. In the Department of Human Resources, they spend $28 million on enhanced language training. We're spending an additional $900,000 on essential skills and workplace literacy, $73 million on the workplace skills strategy, $2.6 billion for Aboriginal education programs, $4.4 million for computers in schools, over $1 million for adult education skills in the Maritimes, $63 million for the sector council. I'm not going to go on and on and on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I just think that we should, rather than have duplication we should try to get it right the first time, or at least the first 10 programs that we provide literacy training to.
No, I think that's a fair comment, and I think you've been talking about the fact that the federal government should focus on national productivity, a more skilled workforce, a more competitive economy, and this is something that you've been saying. But I hope you're aware that if Canada could boost its literacy rate by even 1%, relative to the international average, its productivity would increase by 2.5%. I just wanted to bring that to your attention when you talk about the fact that the federal government, has to be careful.
But should we set up a 16th system to try to encourage people to?
If you just let me finish, Minister, as well, I just want to also bring to your attention, because since you talk about the fact that, you question why adults should be receiving literacy program skills, I just want to bring to your attention that there's about 9 million Canadian adults whose inability to read is holding them back, and approximately 5.8 million can't even cope with the demands of a typical workplace, and the remaining 3.2 million can't even read medicine bottles, a job application, even an election ballot if they want to go and vote, just in this region as well. So I think these are important issues that you need to address and talk about. When you talk about, I'm not going to go back to the earlier comment and refute what you said, he said, she said.
Well,
but I think the cuts speak for themselves, and you clearly indicated that the federal government has no role to play when it comes to literacy. And when you talk about national productivity and a more skilled workforce, it seems like right now it seems like rhetoric, because clearly the C.D. Howe Institute last fall came out with a report indicating that if there was an increase of literacy, even 1%, that would improve our productivity. And it just kind of bothers me a great deal when you talk about productivity, when you talk about waste and mismanagement, you cut literacy, which is very important to our productivity and to adults as well.
Yeah. But Mr. Baines, we deal with facts. We have answered. We spend tens of millions of dollars recording what we say so that we have an accurate record of what was said. You just said two things: that I questioned the need for adult literacy. Never did that. Never said that. Never suggested that. You just said that I said that the federal government had no role. Never said that. Never suggested that. Never felt that. Never believed that. So you've got to deal with facts, sir. And when the facts are misrepresented, you bet your boots I'm going to call them to task. And the member for Wascana has done a huge disservice to his personal reputation when he tabled proof of allegations that he had made, and his own proof were zero. They were not true. And I think at some point, if people have to misrepresent quotes and basically invent ammunition, perhaps their case isn't strong enough. And that does a real
I'm not inventing
disservice.
anything here. I'm just saying the facts right now. I'm letting you right now that there's 9 million Canadian adults whose inability to read is holding them back.
Suggests that your argument is morally bankrupt.
5.8 million that can't cope with the demands of a typical workplace. These are facts, right?
Your allegations are without moral authority, sir,
people
because
that
you
can't
quoted
read a
me.
medicine bottle, the job application, even as I said, for an election ballot. So I'm just stating the facts here when it comes to program cuts. And I was just focusing on the program cuts.
Mr. Baines,
You said two things that I didn't say.
The time is up, and you'll have a chance to review it later on. We're going to go to Madame Thibault.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, distinguished guests, we're here following a motion, due to a motion on the part of the Bloc. And I think that it reflects the importance that the members around this committee table attach to expenditures. I'm surprised by some points in your statement, Mr. Baird. You refer in several documents, actually, in your government, to openness and transparency. And you stated that you wanted to meet the needs of Canadians. That's my own loose interpretation, translation of what you said. But I would say that, on the contrary, what you have done through your cuts is to profoundly affect the most underprivileged people in this society. And this is based on facts. 3/4 of those cuts affect those people. 1/4 are related to operational cuts. So the government actually had a choice. It could have cut in its operations, but what it did do was cut in measures that were helping citizens. And I'll give you a few examples. There's elimination of consultative groups, elimination of funding to groups that are advocating for citizens. There are several groups that my colleague listed, status of women, and I'd like to speak about what your Minister of Heritage said. She said that eligibility criteria had changed. So these criteria were changed for certain programs. There are certain surveys that are no longer happening. And there are certain criteria that are no longer admissible from certain provinces. So these aren't cosmetic cuts, these are deep cuts. There has also been the elimination of non-used funds. You said it yourself. So let's take the issue of the pine beetle. Well, there were certain funds that weren't used. $11 million was withdrawn. Several $1 million were taken away from fisheries, textiles. Well, why weren't those funds used? Why was the Conservative government not interested in using those funds on initiatives that had already started? There was also $40 million unused in social programs in Quebec. There will be a loss of $5 million over 28.5 that had been allocated, and I'll give you 3 other examples. There's been a reduction in funding to assist museums. We have a regional museum, and we had a traveling exhibition. Actually, we have a traveling exhibition because not everybody can get to Rimouski in the lower St. Lawrence area. So that exhibit travels to benefit people throughout the regions and to bring them some of that culture. For those of us who live in Rimouski, it's easy. But for those who live outside and outlying and more remote areas, well then, that's it. It's finished because that funding has been eliminated. And it's essential. It's essential to our quality of life as citizens. There's also been a cut for certain reimbursements for tourists. That will affect tourism. Another $6 million was cut in youth employment programs. So I maintain that the government had a choice. It could have cut in its own spending and in other programs rather than in programs that affected these people. And why did you not then focus your cuts internally? And why did you not put your own government on a diet rather than affecting these ordinary citizens? Because you chose to affect them drastically. I'd like to know why. And I'd like to know whether the departments were given a list of priorities that they were supposed to affect, or were they given a choice? Because I think what you did is that you handed out orders, and that's how the cuts were made. My first question is for Mr. Baird, with respect to the reasons why he didn't cut more internally on operations. And my second question was for Mr. Maloney. Thank you for your comments. I agree that we had choices. The first decision that this Prime Minister made was to have a smaller cabinet, and as a committee, our first decision was to cut in money that we hadn't spent. We wanted a smaller cabinet, and we cut in the own funding that we were using. That's where we focused our cuts. That was our first decision. That's what the Prime Minister did. We also decided to not spend $20 million in order to have a greater budget. That is to say, we decided to cut in the budgets for regional ministers. And I think that was a good decision. The second department that was affected, the second most affected department, was my own. You also spoke about other cuts. Well, of course, if your budget is cut, then you're impacted.
in scope. If I were to put 400 400 quarters on the floor here, 400, these budget reductions would be taking one single quarter. 400 quarters, one quarter off. That puts it into context. When we were increasing spending by more than 5%, we took these savings and put them to health care. We put them to a cancer control strategy. We increased supports to families with children with disabilities to try to respond to other pressures. So we may have valid differences of opinion, which I think is fair. But I think we had choices, and our choice was to put more in health care, more in a cancer control strategy, and more to support families with children with disabilities.
So I didn't say that you had made 100% cuts, but why did you only choose to make 25% of those cuts internally? You mentioned Treasury Board. Well, over 5 years, from 2000 to 2005, it increased its budget by 26%. That's the board's budget. Now, you weren't there, yes, but you are there now. Why? So it was increased by 25%. Why didn't you look at that further as minister? Why didn't you look at your own budget and decide that you could reduce that and also ask the other departments to do the same? So really to slim down your operations and then to leave those services that were essential to citizens with them, whether it be cultural or otherwise. I said that you made ideological cuts. You can't really say the contrary. I mean, you have prevented advocacy groups from being funded. And that was your guide, that was your directive, that was your order to cut those groups. So why have you decided to affect citizens like that rather than to slim down your own machinery?
I guess I reject the premise of the question, because I think we did lead by example in the reductions I mentioned earlier. I think the internal savings are important. The previous government led an expenditure reduction exercise that identified some $12 billion in internal operations. I think in many respects they might have overreached and booked savings that what I would call phantom savings that we have to ensure that constantly ensure that they were doable. They just sometimes I think don't worry, be happy type expenditure reduction exercise. We wanted to ensure that we met reductions.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Mr. Moore for a short, and then followed by Mr. Cramp.
When I first ran for office back in 2000, one of the dominant issues in that election campaign was the issue of the brain drain. And I ran for office and was elected at the age of 24. And one of the reasons why I continue to run for office and to continue to want to serve as a member of Parliament is frankly to work very strong on competitiveness and to pay down our debt. We cut less than 0.5% of the federal government's annual spending. Well, that's it. Less than 0.5%. Navdeep Bains just said, where are the cuts coming from? For example, we cut $20 million that was going to agriculture, I believe in the province of Nova Scotia. $20 million that was allocated but never spent. It was just sitting there. So what we've decided to do, as Madame Thibault would say, in an ideological way, is to say that's frankly stupid. If the money is allocated but not spent, let's take that money and give it back to Canadian taxpayers through the form of tax relief, or better yet, in my judgment, say to my generation, we're not going to bankrupt your future by saddling you with debt from broken politicians by promises that were never fulfilled by politicians you've never met. So paying down the debt, I think, is critically important to this country, critically important to our future. And I think that this boy who cried wolf routine of the federal government cutting less than 0.5% of the federal budget so that we can pay down the debt so that young Canadians have an opportunity so that they're not going to be saddled by massive taxation with 1/3 of their tax dollars going to pay down the debt. I think that's responsible fiscal management, and I think anybody who says cutting less than 0.5% of the federal budget is fiscally irresponsible are themselves utterly out of touch with Canadians.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. I just would clarify a remark I made earlier. When I talked about the $12 billion of savings by the previous government, 85% of those were internal, not 100%. I agree. I think there are two ways to to raise taxes. One, you do it directly, and two, you just borrow money, and then you just sort of give a tax increase to the generations that follow. And I think one of the things we want to do is have a balanced approach. Real tax cuts to put more money into hardworking families who are struggling to make their ends meet. Two, on debt repayment, so that we can leave this country in better shape than we inherited. And three, into making investments, whether it's the ones I mentioned in health care, which is a particular concern to folks in my constituency. We've got to take a balanced approach on all three. What we didn't do is have the temptation to go on an end-of-year spending spree. In March, in previous years, they'll have spent upwards of $5 billion of unplanned money, and the previous government set up billion-dollar foundations, often with little accountability and no access to information for the public. So we avoided doing that, and rather wanted to present a clearer picture of the finances. And when there was a surplus, we didn't go on a spending binge. Rather, we paid down debt, which will mean a brighter future for the children of today. That's going to put that in context. When you think of $13.2 billion, what that equivalent would save if it was all cash debt would be about $650 million this year, next year, the year after. And I think that was a prudent decision, and one with which I think Canadians welcomed.
Mr. Cramp.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Well, I'd certainly like to thank the Treasury Board and our other guests for coming here, and particularly on such short notice. For all of us.
I heard you were going to be here, Mr. Cramp.
Well, I can assure you that I don't quite share some of the comments that I'm hearing from some of the other members across here today. Quite honestly, I'm not only, I suppose, surprised, but I'm a little bit disappointed. As you said, we have an aging society. The demands on the future are going to be literally, heavier and heavier and heavier. And if we don't eliminate the debt and reduce that debt, as the Treasury Board President said, $600 to $650 million each year thereafter, based on things, it requires prudent management. My opposition colleagues seem to have an attitude: have money, we'll spend. Well, we have a surplus, and that surplus doesn't just happen. All parties have contributed to that surplus. All parties have contributed to that surplus through the House, and I would suggest that we have an obligation, as the Treasury Board President has said, to ensure that we have to have finally a level of accountability for our spending. And I'm wondering if the Treasury Board President could elaborate a little bit. There were people saying, well, if we have this surplus, why do we need more savings? Why do we need savings? Why don't we just spend it? Could you maybe give me a little bit of an answer on that?
No, it's don't worry, be happy, fiscal management. I think one of the important things is that we align the government's priorities to the people's priorities. Canadians expect us to manage their hard-earned tax dollars wisely and well, and to respond to the concerns. And just because something was a concern last year or 10 years ago or 20 years ago when a program was announced doesn't mean it's a priority now. Another real concern I have is one of our colleagues in the House of Commons said the following statement: "Nothing starts a feeding frenzy more than the smell of cash around Liberal backbenchers." That's not a Conservative MP saying that. That's the member for Kings Hants, who's a member of the Liberal caucus and a leadership candidate. And I think he wisely identified a real concern when we have big surpluses is about what his caucus colleagues might want to do with it.
Well, thank you. Well, obviously, for you to come up with these savings and your committees, it just doesn't come from one area. It isn't either one program that wasn't effective or wasn't delivering results or money left over. There's several areas of of interest in which obviously you were able to come up with savings. Could you maybe identify some of those?
I'll tell you one area we didn't cut. My premier in Ontario was very strong and very in his condemnation of the Liberal government in cutting transfers for health care, which were cut by about $25 billion. My premier in Ontario fought hard against those Liberal cuts to the social fabric of Canada. And that premier, of course, was Bob Rae, who was a very effective critic of the Liberal decision to cut $25 billion in transfers from the province, and we didn't do that. So I'm proud, particularly proud of that.
Fine. So we went through this exercise, and there's obviously condemnation, criticism, praise. Where do we go from here? Is this the end of it now? Is this a one-shot deal, or where do you see us going in the future?
I think we should constantly be looking at where are we spending tax dollars wisely and well. And you can, Mr. Cramp, you can pick up the paper any day and find examples where Canadians are expressing dissatisfaction. We heard just today, for example, there are various Liberal ministerial aides who won free rides into the public service. And that's taxpayers are going to have to pay for that, where there were a scheme set up with phantom jobs. So, I mean, there's a potential for savings right there if we can get to the bottom of yet another Liberal scandal. So we'll be looking into this. This report that exposed this came from an arm's-length officer, Maria Baratos, the head of the Public Service Commission. And again, it involved my friend, the member for Kings Hants, and the member for Vancouver South, who you may want to get before this committee, Madam Chair, to ask them about that.
Very much. I must tell you, though, that we do know one thing is the cuts that you've made in some areas are definitely not phantom cuts. The court challenges programs, the Women's Bureau, I mean, let's face it. The literacy programs, those aren't phantom cuts, and they hurt people who need help. I'm going to go on now to Mrs. Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Mr. Minister. I recently met in Toronto with a number of community agencies, dozens of them in fact, unanimously very, very concerned and distressed about the cuts announced by your government. They're concerned because there was very poor communication. People were not consulted with. Before the cuts were made, some of them found out about cuts to their organization by looking on a government website. There seemed little concern about the impacts of these cuts, and the cuts seemed to be particularly targeted to the not-for-profit sector in our society, and some of the most vulnerable groups, the volunteer sector, literacy. 4 in 10 Canadians struggles with literacy. These programs are going to be affected. Women's programs, and now we see the word equality disappearing from the website of the status of women, along with a 40% cut in their budget. And we now see that for-profit organizations are going to be allowed to seek money from the status of women. So I wonder if the Royal Bank is now going to be eligible for grants from status of women, but as long as they don't seek equality. Immigrants are targeted, youth. So I'm very concerned about the cuts and the impact on our communities right across the country. And I have to say, for a party that campaigned on the issue of a democratic deficit and the need for a new democracy, that squelching or reducing democracy by cutting advocacy programs and the ability of community organizations, some of the most marginal voices, to be able to speak up and challenge the government on issues of concern. This is very, very troubling, and I think it's troubling to silence some of the most marginal voices in our society. It's easy to always hear from the very powerful, but less easy to hear from some of the people who are most marginal. And I include the Court Challenges program because without those resources, some of the most marginal people would not have access to their full charter rights. Now, I've heard arguments today about economic efficiency, which of course we all support, and about the need to pay down the debt, which of course we all support. But, you know, a $13.2 billion surplus, and the entirety of which goes to pay down the debt, doesn't make sense. And this at the same time as we continue to subsidize the oil and gas industry to the tune of $1.4 billion. It seems bizarre to target the most vulnerable sector. So my question to you, Mr. Minister, is why is your government trying to silence some of the most marginalized groups in our society by denying the funding that they need to survive?
I guess it won't surprise you that I don't agree with the premise of the question. There are quieter voices who want the government to spend more on health care delivery. There are quiet voices who want us to spend more money on immigration settlement. You're a member from Toronto. I'm a member from Ottawa, both big cities in Canada. One of the things I'm proud of in our budget, that we took some of these savings to help pay for things like immigration settlement, where the province of Ontario was getting a raw deal for many, many, many years. Again, my premier fought hard to get the Liberal government to finally back down and treat Ontario fairly. I can remember he met well into the evening. The former Prime Minister and I was the only member of Parliament on the Hill to fight for Ontario, to be there to support him that night. So we're putting more into immigration settlement. And there's a people who are a quiet voice who have been disadvantaged, particularly in the province of Ontario for years. We had half the immigrants and we were getting 25% of the money. And now we're going to get our fair share. And I think that's important. So there's one example of a reinvestment to a group. Talk about marginalized, very a voice that hasn't been heard, that's now being heard. So I could give you more examples.
But Minister Baird, if that's the case, then why aren't we investing more of this money into programs like literacy, and why are we cutting money from the youth employment program? I mean, this is a government, your government, that wants to get tough on crime, and yet programs that help marginalized young people take a first step into the workplace are being cut. There's no logic to it, except there is, or I ask you, is there an ideological basis for these cuts that they all seem so targeted on the most marginal people in our society?
Let me speak to you, the example that you raised about the youth employment program. There's a part of that is specifically designated to youth at risk that we're not reducing funding towards, but it just didn't make sense to provide wage subsidies in parts of the country that are very close to full employment. I mean, there are jobs in many parts, summer jobs in many parts of the country, $10, $15, $20 an hour that went unfilled this past summer, and it just seemed odd for the federal government to be providing wage subsidies in these communities. There are other areas of the country where the prosperity has not reached, where there's still an important role to play, and the program will be there to do that.
So you're saying in a city like Toronto, where we still have a problem with many marginalized youth, and it's been very high profile when we've had difficulties with marginalized youth, that these programs will still be there for them?
The component for youth at risk is one that we're not touching. And we'll respond in many ways. I know I have met with Francis Lankin, the head of the United Way of Greater Toronto, to talk about what we can do to better coordinate and work with officials in Toronto. But the component for youth at risk, I think, is an important one, and one that was specifically exempted.
Can you explain why the word equality has disappeared from the Status of Women website?
I haven't been on the Status of Women website. I think you could direct that to the Minister. I think we all support equality.
The word has changed to participation as opposed to equality, and there is real concern. The real concern is that with 40% of the Status of Women budget being chopped, that women's organizations across the country will suffer from this. Women's voices will be silenced, and there's real concern that your government does not share a commitment to women's equality. So I ask you, does your government share a commitment to women's equality? Yes. Then why are you cutting the Status of Women budget by 40%? I
think if you look at a department with a budget in the order of $20-odd million, the amount spent on administration versus the support to communities was so incredibly high. I think it was the highest in any department within the government. And to have such a small department with such a huge regional presence, I mean, how many, with the increases we're giving, for a cancer control strategy or for health care. How many women who are on the waiting list for breast cancer surgery, for cervical cancer surgery, for hip and knee replacements. Their ability to participate in society is being unhinged because we didn't have enough resources for health care.
But how about
and we
women?
made a choice to say, rather than having more administration in that department, to put more money into the frontline system for our hospitals, for our doctors, for our nurses,
For the
our
oil and
long-term
gas
care
industry.
beds. Well, I don't think there's any changes in our budget with respect to the oil and gas.
Right, the
industry.
subsidies continue. So I guess pitting women with cancer against women who are advocating against violence against women is a false dichotomy.
Well, I always found very interesting that the status of women would provide money for advocacy, but not money for frontline services. I know I find that very frustrating. When I was in Ontario, and we opened a good number of shelters around the country, around the Ontario, we opened 2 new shelters for battered women right here in Ottawa, and the federal government, the status of women, were great to give a grant if you wanted to have a conference, but if you wanted to actually help to prevent violence against women and to give women a refuge from violence, there was no money. So I think it's a question of priorities, and hopefully the fact that we didn't cut health care and we gave a 6% increase to Ontario for the budget for health care, hopefully that will give them some additional flexibility. Instead of cutting them by $25 billion, the provinces will have a little bit more flexibility to meet some of these demands, which I think are really important.
Your time is up, sir. We're now going to Mr. Algabra.
Minister, thank you for coming. I just have to say something. It's the credibility of a Conservative talking about fiscal management and financial prudence is as credible as Mike Harris' promise to open up more hospitals in Ontario. Canadians have not forgotten about the highest level of deficits and debt that the previous Conservative governments, federal government, have accumulated, and we in Ontario are still trying to recover from the previous shambles, fiscal shambles in Ontario. So my question to you, why did you shut down the Core Challenge program?
I can't, other than the slander that preceded the question, I don't recall Mike Harris ever campaigning to open more hospitals.
But that's the credibility. It would be the same level of credibility if he were to say that. Don't miss the point. Why did you?
No.
Why did you?
Forget the drive-by smear. Let's move on to my question.
Yeah. So this is not a drive-by smear. Imagine if Mike Harris promised to open up more hospitals. What kind of credibility would he have?
Well, if you go down Carling Avenue, you'll see a brand new Royal Ottawa Hospital.
Yeah.
That I was very pleased to announce with the Minister of Finance at the time, Jim Flaherty, and with the Minister of Health at the time, Tony Clement. And the opening is going to be happening on November the 1st. I hope you can make it. It's a great new hospital. It's state of the art. It's lovely.
I'm sure.
It's a P3 too.
Minister, Minister,
and I know McGuinty promised to get rid of the P3s.
I have to tell you,
but it's a great new hospital. You should come to my riding in the Queenswood Carleton Hospital. See the great expansion at the hospital.
I have to tell you, I occasionally enjoy your theatrics, but now I'm still looking for your answer. Why did you shut down the Core Challenge program?
Well, we made a decision that we would rather put those funds to work for people in line for medical treatment. We made a decision to put those funds in line for a cancer control strategy. We made a decision that we would rather increase the tax credit and support for families with a child with disabled children. Okay. We would rather spend the money on those 3 areas than on the area you mentioned.
No, I mentioned the Core Challenge program, $2.3 million a year. That's one trip that the Prime Minister makes overseas. So to tell me that that cut had any financial impact on the budget is hollow. Tell me, really, why did you shut down the Core Challenge program?
Maybe in your world, $2.5 million isn't a lot of money, but for the hardworking people I represent in Ottawa and Stepien, you bet your boots it is. And what about the equality of a young disabled child whose parents need a bit of support? What about the equality of someone on a waiting list for heart surgery who has a heart attack because they've been waiting for a year and a half? What about the equality of someone waiting for cancer care? We made the legitimate decision to put more money into health care and less money into that area. We'll, some will agree and some will disagree. We didn't do what the Liberal government did, was to cut health care by $25 billion.
The Liberal government didn't cut health care program. They raised it by $40 billion last year.
Yeah.
But let me
When you
ask
take
a question.
$25 billion out over 5 years and put $40 billion in over 10 years, that's not exactly an increase. And if you don't believe me, ask Bob Ray.
Didn't you say it was ridiculous that the federal government is funding programs that challenge government legislation?
I never used the word ridiculous. You're making it up.
No, I didn't say ridiculous.
You did. You just said ridiculous.
Okay.
You just said ridiculous. What do you mean I didn't say
Minister,
ridiculous?
you didn't say
Get
ridiculous.
Hansard.
No,
It'll
no.
show you. You just said that. And I'm not going to let any more drive-by smears.
Minister,
Is he going to answer my questions or
okay.
what? I mean, this is ridiculous.
Straight questions.
This
no
is
games.
ridiculous. You need to answer my questions.
I
That's
did.
why
You
you're
just
here.
didn't like them.
Did you not say that whatever word you used described?
Did not say whatever? Well, I mean, you got to be more precise than that, sir.
I mean, this is not theater here. We're taking this job seriously.
Yeah, this
and
is
I
not
hope you are
fiction
taking
either.
it
It's not
seriously,
make-believe.
Minister. Didn't you say that the federal government should not be funding programs that challenge government legislation? Did you say that or not?
I said that the federal government had a responsibility to make sure that its laws, both the ones they present and those on the statute book, were constitutional and respected the charter, and that we shouldn't, we shouldn't negate our responsibilities as a government and as elected officials.
You know, you tell that to women, immigrant women in the 80s that were not eligible to English as second language because if it wasn't for the Core Challenge program, they were not eligible to receiving English language training. You tell that to Sikh Canadians who are now able to take their religious tradition into schools. You tell that to Jewish families who are able now to put religious ornaments on their balconies. Those were all outcomes of Core Challenges program.
It was the Mulroney government which came forward with allowing, we're the first Sikh in the RCMP. It was a Conservative government that gave Aboriginals the right to vote. It was a Conservative government who gave women the right to vote. It was a Conservative government who did many of these things, and I don't think I need a lecture on equality from a member of the Liberal Party.
You know what, Minister? Canadians have a lot more confidence in our system than you do. Canadians know that we have a judicial branch that balances out the legislative and the executive branch. And by cancelling the Core Challenge program reflects your lack of confidence in your legislation and how you conduct business, and you just want to silence the court, and that is reprehensible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will go to Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming today with your counterparts. And looking forward to my 8 minutes of sticking to the facts and not the rhetoric that has been going on for the last few minutes. But I was a city councillor for the city and region of City of Burlington, region of Halton, for 13 years. Every single year, I brought budget cuts to the table, looking, and some got passed and some didn't. Can you remind us, because I like to deal with the facts, how much the government is spending in an annual year and what the actual cut is that you've proposed and that we're working on?
It's about $200 billion, and it's less than 0.5%. And we're increasing spending by some 5%. We're making a choice to spend money differently. Just because things were decided 5, 10, 20 years ago doesn't mean that it's best for 2006. And yes, I concede that we will do the very best job we can to meet the priorities of Canadians. Some Canadians would have us put all the money into tax cuts and no new investments. Some Canadians would have us put all the money into new investments. And some Canadians would have us pay it all down, pay down the debt. We've taken a balanced approach. We're paying down debt, we're increasing investments, and we're cutting taxes. And I think that's a balanced approach which Canadians welcome.
Okay, I appreciate that. I made a couple of calls. I've had a few calls. I had the opportunity to be on the Finance Committee last week for a tour at West, and of course there was questions on those particular issues. Would you be surprised, Minister, that when I asked people if they've actually read about the cuts and why they were made and where they were made, that I got very little or no response in terms of that they actually had heard it, that they'd really been relying on either press releases or press that their organizations have done? What are you doing in terms of communication of where those cuts are actually coming from?
Well, we certainly did an announcement. I'm sort of hesitant to spend millions of dollars to promote a few $1 million worth of spending reductions. So that's obviously concerned. It's obviously a challenge in any environment to be able to get your message out in the 500-channel universe.
Okay. Two things from my area in particular. For example, one of the areas you cut was museums. Money not spent, basically, not applied for, not spent. I called my museums organizer, used to be on the board. They never got any money from that program. Could you tell me, in your discussions with other departments, is there a program review that happens that maybe even happened before we took over government to let you know where these cuts could be made? Or what was the process to get where we are today?
There was an exercise by the previous government where they identified cuts of $12.5 billion. This exercise is far more modest of $1 billion.
So that was, you asked other ministers to give you suggestions, and you made...
We looked far and wide to identify areas through the criteria, and keeping an eye on the priorities of Canadians. Canadians elected a new government. There's been quieter voices which have not been heard, voices for health care, voices for more police officers, as two prime examples.
Okay. You had some decision to make. Could you have made more cuts? Is there more opportunity for us to be making more cuts?
I think when you run a $200 billion corporation, as all of us in Parliament are charged to do, you should always be looking to ensure that you're spending taxpayers' dollars wisely and well and on the priorities of Canadians.
The one issue that I heard on the trip out west a fair amount about was literacy. And I'd like just to, I like to deal with the facts. My understanding, if it's not correct, you can correct me today, or the staff can correct me today, that not a single organization with an existing agreement had their funding cut. Is that an accurate statement?
I guess there's a big difference between advocacy and actually frontline learning. We'll probably spend, with the immigration settlement dollars, we'll probably spend more on the training component of literacy. And that's important. Again, that's a frontline service. Some people would rather fund conferences or advocacy organizations rather than frontline delivery, which is certainly a higher priority for our government. I talk about, I mentioned the status of women. They will fund if you want to have a conference or do a study on domestic violence, but if you actually want to provide frontline services, they don't provide any financial support for the provinces are left to do that. And hopefully with the increase in the transfers to the provinces, that'll give them greater flexibility to meet some of these demands, which perhaps aren't always highest in mind.
Mr. Minister, I think you did an excellent job of getting us to where we are. I think it is only small at 1.5%. I know we used to try to get, there'd be budgets presented to us with 8% and 9% increases, and we'd get them down to 3%. So we were a lot more ruthless at the municipal level than we are here, which, as a new member, I'm still learning on how to make those changes and find it. What do you foresee in terms of your department's role, in terms of the future, in terms of overspending and waste that does happen here at the federal level?
What we want to do is ensure that there is better accountability mechanisms in place. There'll always be mistakes when you've got an organization with hundreds of thousands of people working in it. We're all human, both in the political and the public service side. What we want to do is put in a better process to identify problems and shortcomings earlier. We don't want to stifle innovation within government, politically or within the public service. We want to recognize that on any given program, you're never going to get 100% of results, but we want to have processes in place to ensure that we do the very best job we can. And those are the types of accountability mechanisms we're trying to put in place, particularly through the Federal Accountability Act, through the Federal Accountability Action Plan, which are two big initiatives.
Right. Madame Thibault indicated that where the split is in terms of programming and funding. What's your plan for any employees who are displaced due to the cuts?
Well, this is something that's a big concern to me. One of the real priorities that I've brought to Treasury Board. We're not going to have perfect relationships with the public service unions, but we're working hard. There will be some 300, 340 job losses as a result of this. But I'm very comfortable that we'll be able to work with each and every one of those individuals to find them other employment. We do have more than 5,000 people who leave the public service every year for retirement or to pursue other opportunities, and the reductions we made are in fact less than 5% of our annual turnover. And it's an important message that I brought to our bargaining agents that if there are concerns raised, we want to work with them. We've been able to establish, I think, 5 or 6 collective agreements, negotiated settlements, including one that has gone on for more than 4 years. So we're working hard for a constructive relationship with the public service at all levels, and it's based on respect.
And likely, finally, we've got about a minute left, right? You know, we're working hard as a government. We've recognized that there's a fiscal balance that needs to be done, and we have you and a number of other cabinet ministers working on that issue, including the Prime Minister. These cuts, do they have any effect on our relationship with the provinces or the territories?
Well, that was a decision we made right from the get-go, as we didn't want to establish the approach that Bob Rae was so critical of, where they balance the budget on the backs of the provinces and on the backs of our hospitals and our doctors and our nurses. That's why we didn't reduce transfers to the provinces or infrastructure, which is generally a partnership. That was an important priority that we brought to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Baines.
Madam Chair. Minister, I guess there's a certain theme that's developed in today's discussion. Obviously, the theme is there's cuts to social programs and more to come. Based on your remarks, that's the impression I get. And I would like to echo the comments of my colleague with respects to fiscal management. It needs to be noted that you take great pride in the surplus that was generated, but that was through the hard work and diligence of the Liberal government, alongside many other Canadians, and working in a collaborative fashion to fix up the books and the mess that was left by the previous Conservative government that almost bankrupted this country. So I just wanted to make that point as well. But I think there's also a new theme that you developed, aside from the social cuts and aside from the cuts that are yet to come, withholding funds. I think this is something that I think might be new practice for you. So I just wanted clarification on this as well, is that you withheld the federal government's $200 million commitment to the city of Ottawa for the light rail transit. And there's 3 components to this particular issue that come to light. First is the legal consequences of your action. And when you talk about Canadian taxpayers, you take great pride in it, but yet now you put them in jeopardy and they might be liable for your actions for intervening in this particular file. There's obviously the breach of confidentiality agreement that has occurred with respects to particular items that you released to the media. There seems to be an implication that you possibly might want to get involved in the municipal elections through these actions. I don't know if that's the case. I trust you don't. I think you're a very honorable member and you work hard, so I hope that's not the intention. And thirdly is this unprecedented action of why you would get involved in a particular matter like this. This is the first time, I believe, in Canada's Strategic Infrastructure Fund that in Ontario where a minister has gotten involved so late in the game. And then the ironic part is you've got involved thinking there's an issue, but yet you made it very clear that the new council, if they come in, can okay the deal. If there's no problem with the deal, then why get involved? So all these issues really are mind-boggling. It's difficult to understand why you get involved, and most importantly, you're putting at risk Canadian taxpayers. So I would like you to talk about this new theme now, aside from the social cuts, but the new theme of withholding funds from projects as well, especially infrastructure, as you discussed previously.
Well, the case didn't arrive on my desk until September the 28th, so late in the process. It was the first time it came before my desk. I do note that Régent Chartrand, the Director of Economic Development and Strategic Projects for the city, and the city's top official on the light rail project, responded to questions at the City Council and said, yes, the prices would remain fixed, and that should the contract be awarded in December, there would be very little exposure.
So you don't think there's any liability to the government through your actions?
That's what Mr. Chartrand said.
I'm asking yourself.
No.
Okay, and you think the fact that your actions have no implications on local implications of what you try to do? There's no perception of that, or you had no intentions of that? I mean, I give you the benefit of the doubt.
This arrived on my desk on the 28th, and I had to make the very best decision I could for taxpayers. I'll concede that this government's effort to bring accountability are unprecedented. They certainly haven't been seen in a generation in this town.
But, yeah, okay, no, I mean, I'm talking about you
the Strategic Infrastructure Fund, and many of the projects that have been awarded by the previous government are coming in over budget.
Yeah, no,
we
I'm
have
talking about
virtually
this
every
specific
water and sewer
project.
treatment project. We have the big 6 cultural projects in Toronto,
This
all over
specific
budget.
project
We have
there could be cost overrun implications.
Olympics in Vancouver overrun. We're just trying to make sure that
I appreciate your concern, but if we can just stick to the topic that we're discussing, Minister. With respect to this particular project, your actions, first of all, you indicate this file was received to you very late in this particular matter. But are you also comfortable that there was no breach of confidentiality when your staff leaked out components of the contract to the media?
I don't believe there was any breach of confidentiality.
And why was that leak? Why did you feel it was necessary when the procurement process is strictly between the municipal government and the company that was responsible for that project? Why did you feel you had to intervene and provide that information to the media when it was not in your jurisdiction?
Well, they were asking for $200 million of federal money. I think
they weren't asking you. This was committed to already by the Treasury Board, and this was
well, no, it had never. No, you're wrong there. This issue had never been before the Treasury Board.
The amounts had not been committed by there was no commitment made by the government?
There was a political promise made a month before the election in 2004. But this issue,
it's a joint agreement between federal, provincial, and municipal level government.
This issue had never come before the Treasury Board until the 28th
Never come before the Treasury Board? There was no commitment made for this?
This issue had never come before the Treasury Board.
Okay, and so you felt to intervene, and you realized that there'd be local implications by your actions?
You know, I'm not supporting any candidate municipally. I do know you have one candidate who's running for mayor as a prominent Liberal. Another candidate for mayor worked for Mr. Martin in the Liberal campaign in the last election. And the third major candidate was head of the Laurier Club for the Liberal Party. So I don't have a horse in this race, sir.
I'm 5 minutes is up.
I'm trying to be patient here, but really, if we could please stick to the subject. We only have 2 meetings on this, not 4. Mr. Nadeau. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Minister, and good afternoon to your officials. I only have 5 minutes, unfortunately. There are some cuts have been made under this $1 billion cut, but there's one point that I think is even more important, and that's the issue of the fiscal imbalance. Quebec and provinces have to manage anything that has to do with health, education, social services, municipalities. These are all areas that fall under their jurisdiction, under the Canadian Constitution. Now, the current Canadian federal government, and I'm saddened, very saddened by this, because it actually resembles the previous government that was of a completely different stripe. As I was saying, I'm saddened by the fact that rather than take part of this surplus to help people, it has chosen not to. We have a debt that has been slowing down. Its growth has been slowing down. And I would like Treasury Board to take a somewhat different direction and decide that a good part of that surplus, whether it's a third, 2/3, but a part of that surplus, go to solving issues that we have within Quebec society and Canadian society. And I'm thinking of specific sectors. For example, the textile sector. We've seen, of course, there are problems in the lumber industry, but there are problems in the textile sector as well. And many members of the population, many citizens, are experiencing problems. And the federal government does have a certain amount of flexibility that could allow it to help these more marginalized parts of society. Now, a $13 billion surplus. Some of these cuts affect very sensitive areas of our society. For example, let's take the Court Challenges program. I heard what you said. I understood your message, whether that be during question period or elsewhere. And that is that in terms of Court Challenges programs, the government will always comply with the Canadian Constitution. But, Minister, I'm thinking of specific cases. Let's take, for example, the management of French schools in Ontario, in Saskatchewan. Some provinces were not complying with the Canadian Constitution. Now, how can you expect parents to appeal provincial decisions, let's say, whether that be in education or elsewhere, in order to ensure that provinces will comply with the Canadian Constitution? Under Mulroney, he cut the court challenges program, but then it was reestablished because he realized it was a mistake. So my question is this. In terms of the fiscal imbalance, how are you going to deal with surpluses in the future? And could you please respond to my question about court challenges program? Why not let Francophone people throughout this country be able to appeal decisions with that tool that they had so that we make sure that provinces comply with the Constitution? Thank you, Minister. Well, I appreciate your comments. And I would say that it's the Prime Minister Chrétien, actually, that reestablished that program. I think that your comments are interesting, and I'm always open to your opinions. And it's interesting that you want the Canadian government to give money to lawyers to appeal provincial areas of jurisdiction. I wouldn't have thought I would have heard that from a Bloc Québécois member. Minister, could we be very clear on something? When there is a lack of fairness and an injustice being done to a group, regardless of who that minority is, if there is an injustice being done, then Canada should be able to demonstrate that it will help that minority so that, whether it's a province or another state, ensure that those citizens can do something. And citizens have to be able to approach a government, be that a provincial government, and tell it that it's not complying with the Constitution. For example, that French is not being guaranteed for Francophones. And through that tool, we were able to fight assimilation, for example. Let's take the Montfort Hospital. You're familiar with that example. You were in the provincial cabinet at the time. The province had not acted fairly, and the court challenges program was a necessary tool to help citizens who didn't have the money to correct the situation and to call provinces to order and to get them to comply. Well, it's interesting. You're talking about a file that's very dear to my heart. Ministers take their responsibilities to protect minorities. And when I was in the Ontario cabinet, for the first time in the history of Canada, we guaranteed fairness for Francophones in education. We created 12 Francophone school boards. There were school boards in every region. That was one of the greatest victories for the Francophone community in the history of Canada. There was an independent commission, yes, that made a decision with respect to Montfort. But when I was a minister, that file was closed. I called Ms. Lalonde to say that we take our responsibilities seriously. So it's important for ministers, yes, to take their responsibilities. Thank you, Minister. Let's move on now to Mr. Albrecht.
And thank you, Minister Baird, for being here today. I can tell you without question that the people in my riding are very grateful that our government has taken some steps to restrain spending and to have some measures in place which will not only restrain new spending, but reevaluate programs that have been in place for some time. All of us here have, at some level, a responsibility for a budget, whether it's a family budget or a community board that we serve on, or for many years I served on a school board in my area. And it's always easy to start a new program, but it's very difficult 20 years after the fact to come back and reevaluate whether that program is still doing what we set out to do. And so I applaud the efforts that have been taken here. And I also noticed in the material that we were given that you're committed, Minister Baird, to having all new and existing programs undergo a systematic and rigorous examination. I'm just wondering if you could outline for me, just a very brief way, what that process will be. Will it be annual? Will it be more frequent? What kind of process do you envision for that?
One of the things that I was tasked to do in the budget beyond this was to bring in a new expenditure management system for the government. Our expenditure management system is weak at best. I think we went through the big period of high deficits, and the focus was so much on spending reductions, there became a lack of focus on how do we deal with increases in spending, or how do we deal with the competing pressures for increase in spending. One of the things that I think it's important to do is to constantly evaluate programs to find out if they're meeting with success. So one of the things that I'm working on is to bring a proposal to my colleagues on that issue. We're doing a lot of work on it. Officials have been incredibly busy, but at this stage we don't have anything to report yet. I haven't been back to my colleagues. I do believe, I'll say, one of the tenets I would go in is that we should look at periodically every dollar that's being spent and say, are we getting the results? Are we getting value for money? Are we getting results? Is the program doing what it was intended to do? I don't know many people that send their money back to the government as a grant, say, we don't need this anymore, or gee, we haven't met with success, so you can have the money back. And sometimes you have to ask difficult questions in government, and we're going to ask the tough questions to ensure that the taxpayers' money is spent wisely and well.
Thank you. Do I have any time left?
Yes, you do.
I just wanted to comment as well that I think in terms of paying down our debt, the billions of dollars that we're committed to paying down debt is very crucial. Members opposite are taking great credit for the fact that our deficit has been reduced. But I'd like to remind them that when they came to power, the deficit, the accumulated deficit, was actually $11 billion less than it was when we took power here at this point in history. So in spite of a booming economy, and in spite of all of the efforts that have been put into paying down debt, we still at this point have a higher debt than we did in 1993.
Any answer to that?
That's, I guess, one of the real challenges is that deficits are a tax on future generation. Debt, you think of what we could do with all the money that we're spending on interest every year. I mean, I visited your constituency, and the number of people talking about community safety and the need for tougher criminal laws are incredible. More resources for our police. So I think we have a responsibility to leave the country in better shape than we found it in, and certainly my generation is going to have to work awfully hard to do that, because previous governments have left it in bad shape. To be honest with you, on the fiscal situation, I don't think anyone can wear lily white. Governments of all three parties have borrowed too much and taxed too much, and but we've got to keep our eye on the ball of that simple goal: how do we leave the country in a better shape than we found it in?
Thank you. Mr. Baird, you will admit, though, that getting a $13 billion gift from the previous administration is kind of nice. I don't think you knew that.
See, that's wasn't the previous government's money. That's government. That wasn't the previous. That's the problem with the previous government. They thought the public treasury was their own.
Deficit as a gift left over from the previous administration.
That surplus is not the
thing.
Government's money. It's the people's money.
Yeah, but it's kind of nice to have that to be able to put down against the debt.
Wow.
So, see, thank you. Mr. O'Gabra.
$1 billion.
Madam Chair, and Minister, you put a lot of emphasis today about health care needs and the fact that you'd rather spend government money on health care. So you acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges and needs in the health care sector and other sectors that are important to Canadians. Is that true? I didn't hear the answer.
Sure.
Okay. So can you tell me why, and tell this committee and tell Canadians, why you didn't choose to dedicate part of that surplus towards the needs that are really urgent, and especially the ones you keep talking about, healthcare? Why didn't you do that?
We did. We put more money for cancer control.
No, the surplus, the $13.5 billion surplus. Why didn't you dedicate part of that That's my question. Why don't you dedicate part of that surplus to health care?
I think the equivalent savings would amount to about $650 million. And by paying down debt, we had more money for a public transit credit, so people can breathe cleaner air when we have less cars on the road. We had our cancer care strategy in this budget. They were able to pay for based on paying down debt. There's two examples right there where the health of Canadians will be better as a result of this budget. We were able to, as well, by paying down debt, we had greater flexibility. We were able to increase healthcare spending as opposed to cutting it by $25 billion.
That's airtight logic. I'm impressed.
I appreciate that.
You know, $13.5 billion. An average Canadian family every year faces a similar choice. They have a choice if they want to pay down additional payment towards their mortgage or send their children to university. What do you think they choose?
Well, I'm not going to tell families how to live their lives.
No, what do you think? That's not my question. I'll tell you if you don't want to, because to avoid.
I'll tell you what I think. What families can't do is increase spending by average of 8%. If they get a pay raise of 3 or 4%, and they keep increasing spending by 8%, what happens is the house gets foreclosed because the families can't print money. I am proud of the fact that we paid down $13.2 billion, and I'm very happy to defend that anywhere, anytime, any place to Canadians directly.
Minister,
if you want to fight against that argument,
no, Minister.
God bless.
Let me remind you why you're here today. You're here today to answer our questions, not for us to witness comedy or theater. So I expect you to answer our questions.
I did. You just didn't like the answer.
You did not. No, you didn't answer my question. You didn't answer my question. Canadian families face those similar choices on a daily basis and make choices to invest in their future and the future of their children. This government has chosen to use its own ideology by cutting expenditure on programs that they don't agree with and claim that they're increasing spending on health care or immigration while exactly they're doing the opposite. We had 13, this is a fact, and I know how much you like dealing with facts, $13.5 billion surplus. And I'm not going to get into who's responsible for that surplus. This is taxpayers' money. They expect it to be spent wisely. And it should have gone, many of it, part of it, to invest in health care, education, and future programs. This government has chosen to do exactly the opposite, and it's really regrettable, and most Canadians are upset about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Workington.
Thank you. Certainly appreciate you being here this morning, Mr. Minister. Certainly, I have to follow up on my colleague from across the table. Of course, he rants and he raves about particular household expenditures and how a household might manage its expenditures. I'll tell you a little story, Minister, and it goes like this. I'm married and we have a baby daughter, and there's a number one priority that we have in our household, and that's to pay down our mortgage so that once our child reaches the age of getting her education, we'll be able to pay for it because we won't be servicing the debt on our home. And certainly that has been the commitment that's been shown by this government. And so we appreciate that you've been paying down the debt to ensure that future generations will be able to have the opportunities that all of us have had. So certainly we do appreciate the investment that you've made by paying down the debt, because that will ensure that $650 million will come back into the government coffers ongoing for now into perpetuity. But that isn't my major concern. I have to tell you a little story. I met with one of our literacy groups in our community, the Grand Prairie Lifelong Learning Group in Grand Prairie. It's the larger center in my constituency. And the story goes a little bit like this. The group has been applying for money for several years and has been trying to get money. They're an organization that invests into communities by trying to teach people through partnerships internships, through mentorships, to teach other people to read. So these are older people, these are adults. And what this agency has told me, what this group of people have told me, is that in the past they have found it impossible to access federal dollars because all the federal dollars have been allocated for studies and studies and studies and studies. And what they said is, we don't want one more study. We know that people have difficulty reading. We know who those people are. All we want is the money to be allocated into particular investments and just cut out the studies for now.
You're wrong, though. All the money didn't go into studies. Some of it went for conferences. Some of it went for symposiums. Some of it went for advocacy.
And the story is that these people are frustrated because they know the people on the ground that desperately need the services haven't been able to. And I think Mr. Baines pointed out particularly with eloquence just the problems that the last 13 years of Liberal programs have resulted in. People have not been able to access the dollars so that they've been able to increase literacy in the country. We've seen a decline in the number of adults that have been able to reach the level of literacy that we'd like to expect in this country. So certainly this group was saying they're very pleased that we have withdrawn the money from these studies, and what they want to see is into the future. And the minister or the government has made a number of different investments into literacy programs that will actually get to the ground and onto the ground. So certainly we do appreciate that, and we do want you to continue to move forward. I speak from people that are happy with the direction that you're headed, and I guess the message is that prudence and responsibility will win the day, and so certainly we appreciate it.
Language training is particularly important for new Canadians, and that's why we're increasing significantly immigration settlement dollars, which had been pushed very hard by Premier in my province by Premiers Ray, Harris, and McGuinty to Ontario to get fair treatment. And I think with our budget, this is the first budget where we're moving towards that, and I'm very proud of that because there's a lot of new Canadians in my own constituency, in Ottawa, which is a big city where I serve. In the Toronto and Greater Toronto area, there's significant needs that are now going to be able to be met. And I was pleased I spoke to an individual the other day who works in the Immigration Settlement Agency in my own constituency, and they're seeing a lot of action on the ground now in that area, which I'm very proud of, which is something that we advocated very strongly about. I know long before the election, I had the then Leader of the Opposition talk to my Premier, meet with my Premier, put aside politics, and to try and push this issue. And it was only when Stephen Harper got involved and began to push this issue that finally the Liberal government federally began to cave into all that collective pressure, and now the Conservative government now is delivering on that, and I'm very proud of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you on behalf of my constituents.
Madame Thibault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I never had an opportunity to hear Mr. Mulroney. However, I will put a question. Mr. Maloney, rather. I didn't have a chance to hear you speak. I'd like to know if you've had any discussions with the Finance Department, and I'd like to know if you did so when this exercise started. When the whole exercise started, who decided what? Were officials from the department given specifications on how to reach its goals? So the government had a certain goal, had a target. Departments were all asked to look at their expenses. Were they asked to target specific areas for cuts? So were the departments given specifications on how to do that, or did they have a choice on how to do that? Were there any incentives to encourage or force departments to look at their own operational spending? Was there anything there to encourage them to look at internal spending? Given that over the past several years, there has been an increase in government spending, quite a remarkable increase. And I'm not assigning responsibility of that to your government, your government. I'm just relating a fact. I have another question, but Mr. Maloney, I'd like you to answer my first two questions, and then maybe I can come back to my third. Thank you for the question. The Secretary, Treasury Board Secretary, is also here. I myself was involved in the process. As the President of the Treasury Board just pointed out, a target was set. $1 billion. And so officials from the departments and central agencies and from the Secretariat and Privy Council all looked throughout the government. They were called upon to apply the criteria to their current expenditures and to forecast expenditures. So could I just come back to something then? Allow me to interrupt. Let's go back to the criteria. So deputy ministers, ministers, officials had to look at this. Let's look at the criteria. Were they given the criteria? For example, let's take non-used funds. They're deputy ministers. They're very intelligent. They might have said, looking at this non-used funds, but very usable funds. I mean, was there a certain amount of flexibility there? In your criteria also included good value for money. Well, I'm sure we could get many different opinions from different areas and different departments on value for money. For example, there was the Court Challenges program that was helping people, but the government decided that it wasn't useful, that it wasn't helping people. It didn't, and it chose also not to fund advocacy groups to appeal government decisions. So that's why I'm asking you, were there any specifications given? I mean, there were criteria, and I assume that officials had to follow your criteria. I mean, the big boss was the government. So were they restricted to making a specific choice, or did they have some flexibility? Were they able to advise the government on other ways of savings? So were there means for senior officials to advise you on alternatives, or did they have to follow your plan? That's my question. Well, the senior officials reviewed government expenditures and looked at planned expenditures as well. That is to say, spending that hadn't begun. We reviewed all the expenditures based on available information, based on evaluations and assessments that had been undertaken by the departments themselves, and then compared to the criteria that we were using. In other words, effectiveness and efficiency of spending. So, as the President already mentioned, President of the Treasury Board mentioned, there was a committee of ministers. And so this discussion was based on a process, a consultation process, led by Treasury Board and led by the Secretary. Perhaps I should give the floor to the Secretary to talk about those discussions between deputy ministers. Now, the final phase involved senior officials reviewing the impact and implications of our decisions. That was also discussed with deputy ministers and then with ministers. Thank you. We'll move on to Ms. Nash.
I'd like to ask you about the Court Challenges program. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a law that Canadians support and are very proud of. It, of course, protects equality in Canada. And without the Court Challenges program, many people who, in fact, are the very people whose rights may be at risk don't have the means to be able to, or the resources to be able to challenge unjust laws and discrimination. So to erode or cut completely the Court Challenges program erodes the power of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to protect the rights of those very groups it seeks to protect. And certainly many concerned people have contacted me. They're very concerned that this is a major step backwards for equality rights in Canada. And, you know, there are lots of examples of groups that have used the Court Challenges program, including those who are seeking redress for the Chinese head tax, people concerned about lack of linguistic freedom for Francophone rights. There are many other examples. So there's a real concern about the elimination of the Court Challenges program as an erosion of our democracy and human rights in the country, that the very people who this is designed to protect will no longer have access to the mechanisms and resources to help them get their rights enforced. Can you tell us what the thinking is behind the elimination of this important and successful program?
I think that, you know, the senior citizen in my constituency in Bayshore, who's afraid to leave her apartment at night to walk 3 blocks to go to the Swiss Chalet. As a woman, she feels vulnerable that she can't walk her own streets at night. Our budget is hiring more police officers, putting greater resources in law enforcement. The parent who's struggling to raise their own child, and the inequality of the previous government's child care program, where 85% of children were left behind. You know, the rights of the disabled and medically fragile to health care, where there wasn't enough money budgeted. You know, the rights of disabled children and their families, where the increased support through the tax system for them. We just made a decision that we'd rather put that money into those rights.
But Minister Baird, the ability of these very people to get their rights enforced is what has been put at risk here with the cut of the Court Challenges program. And again, you know, to pit needs like this of the most vulnerable, you talk about seniors, single mothers, to pit those needs against each other is somewhat offensive, because of course we want the senior to be protected. Of course we want all parents and all kids to do well. But, you know, it's pretty fundamental to have access to legal rights, and for equality to be not just a nice thought before the law, but to actually get equality through equal enforcement of the law by those without the wealth and resources to get their rights enforced, to actually get the resources to challenge inequality and discrimination. And it just baffles the mind that we would want to cut a program to help people fight discrimination that has been in a very practical way, whether we're talking about women's equality, language rights, seniors' rights, the rights of immigrants, a program that has been so successful. And it's perplexing.
I guess, what about that right to that senior citizen to walk her own street at night, who feels afraid, a culture of fear, that wants more resources spent on law enforcement? I've spoken about health care. That's a pretty, you know, in my constituency, the 2 highest priorities for government funding are health care and law enforcement, so people can be healthy and feel safe in their communities, feel safe in their homes. And I guess there's just an honest difference of opinion. I respect you have different views, and I don't profess to say I'm right and you're wrong. I just profess to say that's my opinion. And
but, you know, there was also the choice to take the $13.2 billion surplus and put it in its entirety in paying down the debt. Canada already has, compared with other G8 countries, a fairly aggressive debt repayment program. And Canadians generally want to pay down their debts. That's sound economics. On the other hand, Canadians don't want to do that in exclusivity in a way that undermines their fundamental rights and freedoms. And I believe that's what this choice is doing.
Well, we've adopted a balanced approach. We're taking some money to pay down debt. We're taking other money to invest and spend. I mean, we're spending about $35 billion a year, every year, on paying down our debt. We could double the budget of every hospital in Canada with that money. I mean, that's massive. $35 billion, double the budget of every single hospital. So we pay down debt. We have investments. We increased spending this year by 5.5%, plus cutting taxes. We're, I think, adopting a fairly balanced approach. Others may disagree, and that's fair.
I have one last question, Mr. Alghabra.
Minister, I'm curious about a comment you just said. How many police officers have you or the government helped hire in your riding?
We've come forward with a plan for about 1,000 new RCMP officers. I don't know how many will be stationed at the new RCMP headquarters in Nepean.
Oh, so it has nothing to do with the municipal police force?
We have a two-pronged approach. One, RCMP, and the other in our platform spoke of the non-RCMP. The RCMP has been underfunded for many years. It does a huge amount of work in my community.
I understand, but you spoke, and I'm glad that we're hiring more RCMP officers, but you spoke about the senior citizen in your riding who is afraid to walk at night, and that you're helping hire more officers to make her feel more secure. So how many municipal police officers have you helped?
We have three brands of police officers in Ottawa. We have the RCMP, we have the OPP, we have the municipal police force. They're hiring a significant number of new officers this year. Our first branch, our first support, will be to the RCMP to deal with things like the drug problem, things like organized crime. That will have a huge effect on the safety of my community.
Okay, so just to clarify, you really still have no direct impact on the municipal police force that will help that senior citizen that you're referring to?
Well, you know, we're putting $20 million in youth crime prevention. We're putting $26 million in the victims of crime. More money to support the RCMP. I think it's a pretty good start in 9 months. It's not enough. That's why we've got 6 important pieces of legislation before the House to crack down on guns that are used in the commission of offence. To say that that people who abuse children shouldn't get house arrest, and these things will cost more money to do. And I think paying down debt gives us greater flexibility to meet those. When those laws are enforced, we'll have a greater capacity to meet the challenges there. And I support that. There may be an honest difference of opinion.
Yeah, and there are. To ask the question about, I have to tell you, I'm really surprised at how you're pitting one right or one priority over against the other. I know you're only accustomed to counting up to 5 priorities, but there is no. You can't say one right or one priority is a negative zero-sum game against another priority. Minority rights are as important as healthcare, as education, as combating crime. And Court Challenges program, the mere $2.5 million a year that received 12,000 applications over the last 12 years, is an important program that helped enhance minority rights in this country and gave groups the opportunity to access Supreme Court. So it's really disappointing that you're trying to, again, as usual, pit one priority or one segment of community against another, but it's only a polarizing political gimmick, and it's unfortunate and it's regrettable.
What I'll tell you is that being in government is about making choices. The previous government tried to be all things to all people. When you're in government, you have to make choices to put money here as opposed to there. We made a decision to hire more police officers. We made a decision to increase funding for health care. We made a decision to provide expand the tax credit for disabled children. We made a decision to deal with many of these issues. And it is in government about making choices. It's not, you can't do everything. I suppose it's a little easier if you brought in 3 budgets in 1 year, as opposed to bringing one budget. That approach, I don't think, has a lot of support. I agree that there certainly was a lot to challenge in 12 years of Liberal government. There was a lot of Liberal legislation that was worthy of challenging. If the Liberals had cared so much about equality, maybe they wouldn't have cut the status of women budget so dramatically when they were in government. Maybe they wouldn't have cut health care by $25 billion. Maybe they wouldn't have cut minority language funding by 25%. So, before you get on the high pedestal, I just look at the Liberal record. The Liberals fired 40,000 public servants and cut health care by $25 billion. I think our choices were far more responsible.
Minister, I agree with you. A government is all about making choices, and your choices have reflected your ideological bet. Thank you.
Much for being here. Perhaps we'll have you back before too long.
Madam Chair, I always look forward to meeting with you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cramp? We've got one motion here. We have one motion to deal with here.
Of course, presented in due course to committee in both official languages. And it reads as follows: that the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates hold hearings into the matter of phantom positions within the public service, as raised by the Public Service Commission in its 2005-2006 annual report. That the committee call witnesses to testify on the matter, and that the committee issue and table a report in the House of Commons based on its findings. And I table this motion, Madam Speaker, with sort of mixed feelings. On the one side, I don't want to get away from what we want to do. This committee, we're committed to following through with accrual accounting. We're committed to trying to stay the line and present a report that I think is probably the most important area of study for Parliament, which is, of course, the spending estimates. And that can't be done accurately unless, of course, we finish accrual accounting. But what prompted this motion the other day was, of course, when Madame Barados from the Public Service Commission came forward. In her statement and in the report, she said the cases that she talked about in question, the phantom cases, she states they raise troubling questions about political meddling in the staffing of the public service that would warrant, and this is a wording that goes directly to the heart of this committee. It says they would warrant tougher rules or legislation to stop the wide open and unmonitored movement of bureaucrats between ministers' offices and the public service. I took that as a plea. I took that as a plea to say we have a problem. We have a problem. Let's address that problem. And when that came directly from the head of the Public Services Commission to this committee, which we are mandated under, I thought we had an obligation to deal with that. I don't think it's something we can just slough off. I don't want to delay the regular workings of this committee. Perhaps we could do it at extra meetings or special meetings, but I do believe that we definitely have to look at it. So the motion before us is quite simple. It essentially calls on this committee to hold the hearings into the matter as described, and then, of course, make a report back to Parliament. And the very simple reason: phantom positions. Unbelievable. Well, is there one? Is there two? Are there more? It's an open-ended book, and we just can't accept that. So we need to know exactly who requested these appointments. We need to know who signed off on these appointments. We need to know whether any disciplinary action should be taken. And we should also determine if there are more cases. So this has to be done. I really feel that we have to move on this. So what I'm suggesting and asking that we hold a few more hearings, obtain some answers, and then issue a report to Parliament, so that we can ensure that this type of offence never happens again. We are an oversight committee. That's our job and that's our duty. I don't want to get sidetracked, but I do think this is so important that we just can't overlook it and we can't just pass it by. When Madame Barados makes this kind of a statement to this committee, I really think that is a plea. That is a plea. She states right unequivocally, there is a problem. We need it fixed. Does it require legislation? Does it require action? Does it require study? I do believe this committee should seriously look into this matter, and I would ask the committee to unanimously endorse us moving forward and take this to steering committee to see if at some particular point in our schedule, that we could bring this forward was to not interfere with our regular duties.
Thank you. Madame Thibault, followed by Madame Nash.
Oui, j'ai déjà informé Monsieur.
I've already told Mr. Kramp that 2 weeks ago, when we spoke of this matter, I assured him of the support of our party. But this morning when I read the Ottawa Citizen, I learned that
Cramps matin, plutôt.
So I said to Mr. Kramps today before our meeting that since the government has decided to I don't know how the government is going to go about it, but I'm sure it'll be well done. And as important as Mrs. Barata's comments were in her report, I think we should let the government do its work. As Mr. Kramps has just said, we're already short on time, and once the government has done its work, well then, we might decide. Someone then can table a motion to hear the members of the commission that will do the study that the government wants done. But first of all, I think we must leave the government do its work. We are not there to usurp the government's role.
I brought this point up as a nonpartisan issue, feeling that this is a matter that should come before all members of all parties. And if the government is going to undertake a study or evaluation, so be it. But I would have thought that the other members from all parties would have wanted to have some input and would want to set their standard and would have wanted to have some personal attention to this matter so that they could verify and satisfy their own concerns that we are dealing with a very, very serious matter here that could have implications not only for past governments but for future governments, regardless of who they are. We cannot carry on with, if we have a broken record, we just don't keep on with that broken record. We have a duty and obligation in this committee to solve it. That's our job. We are an oversight committee.
Thank you. I'm going to call the vote on this. Madame Nash, yes.
Yeah, I support the intent of the motion and had intended to vote in favor of it. I am concerned about conducting two simultaneous inquiries, as it were. So I firmly believe there should be an inquiry. I firmly believe that the issue of the phantom jobs, which has already come before this committee, is the business of this committee and should be dealt with. But my concern is that we should not take two processes up simultaneously. I'm not sure that's productive. If someone can help us with why we should do that, because it seems that where if one process is going to investigate and uncover certain truths and report on that, then I'm not sure it makes sense for us to duplicate that. Perhaps we should act after the fact and build on their findings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to encourage the members opposite to actually vote for this. And I think the message for us, if we support here at this committee that we are going to actually do the work, that we can send that message off to the government, as you like to call it, and that we are going to take the lead on that. If we do not support this motion, it doesn't happen, nothing happens, the government may take the lead on it. But I think this is an opportunity in a future meeting that if the government says, no, we are going to continue on our process to look at these phantom jobs, well then fine, then we make as a committee decision that we don't want a dual stream process and we back off or we wait for their report or whatever. But I think the logical thing to do would be support this today, that we are going to take the lead as a committee on this issue. We will be the ones calling the witness and we'll be doing the investigation. If we get pushed back, as I've learned as a word here. If they say to us, no, we're going to do our own, then the committee can make a decision. But I think I'm encouraging people to vote for this today so we can send the message that we heard it here first at this committee and we are going to deal with it at this committee.
Thank you. I'd like to call the vote on the motion. All those in favor? Against? Motion lost. And we will be adjourning this committee at this time. Meeting adjourned.